Welcome to another episode of the Alley Report, part of the Service Department. Today we were talking with Katherine Silva, author of Undead Folk, The Wild Dark, and the upcoming Dead Folk. Thank you for coming on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I think I read Undead Folk and I loved it so much, and I'm very excited about the sequel.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for reading. You read early, which was
Mm,
really awesome. I always need those people to hype things up. So
yep.
that was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like it was grief horror done so well. And I think that's kind of a running theme in a lot of your work.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a sad person. So I tend to write a lot of sad stuff. And it didn't occur to me until like fairly recently that that's what my genre is, but it all falls into that. You know, people dealing with rough things in their lives and trying to overcome grief.
Well, I feel like that's something we can all relate to, like anybody. Like
Yeah.
it's something we all go through. Um, and with the sequel, um, is it ever unnerving? Like coming, did you when you were writing Undead Folk, did you have a sequel in mind already, or is that something that you came up with after it came out?
I did not have a sequel in mind when I wrote it. I had enough people tell me that they wanted more of the universe, though, in reviews that it kind of became necessary to write a sequel. And it was kind of a realization knowing that this story wasn't over too. Like I kind of like writing nebulous endings.
Yeah.
Spoiler. Um, and but I felt like okay, I need to write a definitive ending for this. So this is the follow up, the ending, the you know everybody'll hopefully get what they want. It's a little more violent, certainly darker, um, in a very John Wick vein. So
I mean, I can see that with the world building. That was another thing I really appreciated was people talk on and on about usually in fantasy, but also in horror too, about building and lore. And I feel like so much of that isn't what you say, but what you don't say, like what you hint at. And I feel like that was something that was really done well in Undead Folk was there weren't a lot of definitive answers. It let like had you
mhm.
interested, but you could tell you had the answers.
Yeah, it's well, I like the idea that this is such a vast world and there's so many different facets to it, but we're not going to cover all of them because this is a very character specific story. And, so we'll talk about it, but it's, we're not going to explain it. And there's a lot of that still in the sequel. We get a little more of a hint of a wider spectrum of what's going on in the world, but it's still super just like, yeah, you're being dropped into it here. And, things are the way they are because that's the way they are. And that's how it goes.
Um, and another thing I know is, and this is with a lot of your other books is the New England forest, New England wildlife. So much of that is a major part of your work, and also just a lot of horror in general. Like, what is it about New England in particular that just seems perfect for these kinds of stories?
Well, I grew up in New England. I live in Maine. So I have had the woods and the ocean as my backyard for, 35 years. And there is just something so haunting and vast about the New England wilderness. There's a lot of history up here in a, you know, sketchy puritanical, I guess, kind of history, but it's ancient and it's vast. And I think that that is it's daunting, especially for people who have never been to New England. It's a very slow way of life up here. Um, and yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know how to explain it in a way as like somebody outside looking in because I've never lived anywhere else. So to me it's just like, yeah, the woods are awesome. They're they're creepy and they're bordered by mountains and ocean, which is unique and beautiful but also terrifying. Um and so I just love to write about them.
Yeah, I think one thing a lot of people don't realize is just how much forest there is in New England. You assume it's all just been cleared away, but I mean, there's far more than like, I grew up in a pretty rural area, but it's still in Texas, but it's still pretty cleared, been cleared for
Mm-hmm.
generations. And like, especially Maine and New Hampshire have just so much. Um,
Yeah. Northern Maine is like when you see where the more populated places of Maine are, and they're it's like southern Maine and down along the coast for a good chunk of it, and then you get up into like upper Maine, and it's these very sparsely set up towns, a lot of them that are, lot numbers, they don't actually have names. Um, some very Quebecois names as well. Um, it is just amazing how like uh, how rural it does become up there. Um, you know, you're miles and miles and miles away from the nearest town, and your town might not actually be a town. So
yeah, because I know, so I do. There's the obvious Stephen King, but like, I was just kind of looking at it, and I know quite a few horror writers that are from Maine that live in Maine, and a lot of them, live in the more isolated areas. And I just wonder if just growing up in those areas, living in those areas, that's just fuel for the imagination on creepiness, on spookiness.
yeah, and I mean even in living in the areas that are not as rural, like I'm very coastal, so I'm about half an hour from the ocean, and that's where I've lived my whole life. um but even these small towns here, it's like there isn't really the town proper, as it were. There might be a town over here that's got like um, a little grandstand in the middle and like a common area. But everything is just so spaced out. It's basically a town out of a Stephen King book. And it is real. That's just like what towns are like around here. Um, and they might seem very fake to people that read his books, but it's like so true. Um, a lot of towns in Maine are just like that.
Yeah, 'cause I know I grew up in Maine, but it was in Texas, and it was like the town wasn't really a town. There's like one grocery store, kind of. It had been around for like 50 years, and then it was just a stretch of road. And I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was like if anybody got hurt, it was like, okay, well, we got a 45-minute drive to the nearest hospital. Like,
Yep.
just kind of just in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
We had wildlife and crazy thing. I mean, like, your dogs didn't run away; they were eaten by mountain lions, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, we actually have a bear that's been sighted around here very recently. So it's just, yeah, there's a black bear hanging out around here, going through people's gardens, digging shit up. And uh, like that is typical Maine fare.
Um, and with like we go back to the Dead Folk. That comes out in August, so it's not long till that's out. Is
Mm-hmm.
there does this? I know you said you like nebulous endings. Does this wrap up that world, or is there a chance that this will be revisited down the road?
Um, it doesn't wrap up the world, but it does wrap up this character's story. Um, the world of undead folk and dead folk is so vast because and there's so much possibility um, to do stories within it. I wanted it to have kind of a vaguely Western feel, um, and dystopian. So it's got that very, sparse, dried up, um, wide open feeling. And it feels like anyone could have a story in this world. We've only seen this little tiny pinprick in this one town, on this one place along the train track, and there's just so much more to see. So I'm not going to rule it out that I won't visit that world later, but I have no plans to do anything right now with it.
Yeah, and it absolutely had a Western feel to it without being. It wasn't a Western, and it didn't have any of the things you expect from that. But it did have, like you said, that everything's dried up, everything's dead, everyone feels on the edge of something. Like, and I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's usually what makes a good Western is you are away from civilization, you're on the edge of things, you're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, you've got, a clear main character who's on a journey to do something. Um, and and of course, we don't know what that is until, a little bit later into the book, um, but it's very much the same in the sequel. It's just a full on revenge story, and it's hits a little harder in the second book than in the first one. So
I'm excited to read that. And I mean, in both these and some of your other books are very much in the novella, novelette length. I've heard a lot of people say that aside from the short story, that is perfect length for horror because you don't have to try and drag out tension. It's easier to keep that tension and spookiness when you don't have a sprawling page count.
yeah, it's novels are hard, and I've written a few novels where it's you have to sort of like play with your tension, know where to have your low, calm spots, and then really ramp things up. Um, and with shorter fiction, it's it's not easier. I'm not going to say it's easier. I think it's more manageable to really be consistent about how you play with tension. And in this particular story, I felt like I could pay more attention to language choices, to um, to pacing and tension, and to uh, intentionality, I guess, with my, how I wanted to present things, how I wanted to withhold things, because there was just less to keep track of
Yeah,
as a whole. And I really like that. I enjoy that when I'm writing. So I do have a couple of big projects that I'm in the middle of right now, and going back to that after writing short fiction is really weird because I just feel like I'm kind of like willy-nilly loosey goosey all over the place. Um, but I do want to focus on putting out shorter fiction in the future because it's just a lot more fun.
yeah. Like that like kind of mentioned that economy of words. Like you don't have time to just drop a whole chapter in somebody's backstory. It's like, well, I need to sum them up in one or
Yep.
two words. I one or two sentences. And I mean that's when I read like older, especially like the 80s horror boom, like novels, it really is
Mhm.
just like, okay, here's a minor character. He's gonna say one important thing, you'll never see him again, but we're about to spend 16 pages telling you everything about this guy. Like so just sit here, like we find all about the gas station man. Like
Yeah. Like there's something to be said about that too. Like it's just, I don't know, what an amazing way to introduce a character that does not have any permanence.
yeah.
Um because it does fake you out a little bit. And there's something about that too. If you're gonna play with a reader and I guess try to mess with them, that could be fun. That could be very fun. Um, I don't know of many publishers who might go for that, but I guess if you had that in mind and you were really trying to like mess with people, that could be fun.
Yeah, like fake them out a little bit. Oh, this must be important. It's like, no, it's not.
Mm-hmm. Nope.
And also, I mean, just with rising cost of printing and stuff, I feel like a lot of indie publishers, the ones that seem to be really doing well at the moment, are just like, keep it short, keep our printing costs down, and we can put more
Yeah.
books out.
Yep. Yeah. Printing costs are rough right now. And it's like I'm currently in the middle of putting together an anthology for my indie press, which is Strange Wilds Press, and it's probably going to be a 70,000 uh, ish anthology altogether, and that's a decent sized book.
Yeah,
Like it's probably going to cost upwards of like $12 to $14 to print. And then you're adding on like, okay, so then I have to at least double that to be able to make a profit on it. And it's so hard because you want to make things accessible for people. Um, you want everybody to be able to get a handle on it, and then at the same time you don't want to lose money on it, and the
yeah.
shipping costs are way worse than the printing costs.
Oh, yeah.
So it's yeah, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I get the things every now and then from Amazon where they're like, you have to up the price of your book, like by
Yeah,
so much. And it's like, well, at some point, I don't think people are going to take the risk on it. Like, 'cause I mean, it's that
yeah,
thing of like, when people talk about, why does an amazing original movie hit theaters and no one watches it, they'll go see a Marvel movie. And it's like, well, I mean, people want a sure bet. They don't
yeah,
have a lot of spending cash, they don't have a lot of extra stuff, so they're going to spend it. It needs to be a sure bet, and they're scared to take risks.
yep,
Um, and and speaking of and the anthology, that's another one's like that's forest horror, like it
yep.
looks really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. We're going through edits right now. Um, I've got 22 stories from some incredible writers, like just some of them are seasoned pros. One of them was just nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award, like, uh, and then some of them, this is their first publication. They've never had anything out before, and every single one of them is a banger.
That's
They're
awesome.
just it's going to be so cool. I'm so excited.
I love having the mix of, like you said, the seasoned pros and the people this is their first story, because then they get to say like I'm an anthology with so and so a lot. It's like a great
Yeah,
little intro to the indie horror
yeah.
world.
Um, there is one story in particular that I read, and it was one of the last ones I got, and it was by somebody who'd never published anything before. And it's probably one of the best short stories that I've read this year.
That's awesome.
Um, and it's like it's by somebody who's never put anything out before, and I was just like, please, 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 I want this story. um and then ironically I didn't hear from them for a little while, so I was afraid that we weren't going to be able to get it in there, but thankfully it all worked out. But it's like you read that story and you know exactly like where it's going to go, um where it's going to create the most pop. um it's so good.
I, I love that so much. Like,
Yeah,
especially I actually read found an old anthology of horror stories at half price, and one of the stories was about someone running an anthology, and they keep getting these incredible stories, and then they reach out to the person, and the person's like, "No, I don't actually want them published. I just want one person to read them." And so this guy's just like so frustrated. He's like, "Why are you sending me brilliant things?" And the story's him trying to hunt him down. Like,
yeah, yeah. It there were 100 stories that got sent in. Um, and there were a lot of really amazing ones to choose from. That's also a really hard thing to
Yeah.
do. Um, is narrow it down. I think I had like 30 at one point, and I was like, okay, now you have to narrow it down again.
Oh,
So hard.
that's gotta be so hard because like I've submitted to anthologies and been told like by like you were this close like you almost
Yeah,
got in, but it's like but yeah you can only let so many in. You can't let everybody in.
yeah, and it's what's really hard to explain to the people who don't get in is that there has to be sort of like this everything needs to work cohesively together. So there can only be, one or two of this thing, one of this thing, one of this thing. And um, otherwise, that balance is kind of lost. And so trying to find that balance, trying to figure out exactly where this was going to settle, because this ends up being also a very grief existential focused anthology. Um, so a lot of things that homed in on those themes in particular were chosen, and I think we've got a really good selection. Like I think it's all gonna shake out really nicely. I've already got the table of contents figured out. um, so now it's just getting through the edits, and then we'll start doing all the layout and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, that's the stuff I can't. Like it's like it just frustrates me. Like I have to get somebody else to help me with it if I self-publish something. I'm just like I mean I could probably do it, but it'd take me a long time and I'll be very angry at the end of it. So I'm just
Mm,
gonna
at the layout stuff, is that
yeah,
the stuff that?
like
Yeah. um I've been doing this for almost 14 years, so I've had to learn how to do all of it, because at some point, if you have the budget to be able to outsource those things, that's awesome, and make sure um that everything looks beautiful. But I'm also like, I need to learn how to do this myself. If I'm going to have a small press and I'm going to be able to put out books by myself, I need to learn how to do this. So I took the time, got the software, sat down with it, and um, I ended up doing a special collection. I know it was a special version of the Wild Dark that I put out 2 years ago. Maybe it was last year. Um, and I wanted to be able to like do special not illustrations, but like do kind of like the snow effect on the pages,
yeah,
and do special cocktail things in the back, and um, do a whole new cover. It's got like it's a hard cover with a laminate design on the inside, and then also has a jacket. So doing all of that stuff, I was like, okay, this is the gauntlet. I need to figure out how to do all of this stuff so that I'm covered.
yeah,
And doing it was really good. Doing it really like set me up so that I feel more confident in putting out a superior product, not just like kind of throwing it out there and being like, well,
yeah.
I guess
Like
it looks okay.
using vellum and calling it a day. Um, but yeah, I mean, with when you run your own press, like it's the margins are thin a lot a lot of times. Like so yeah,
Yeah.
like whatever you can take on yourself.
Yep. Yep. Um, but that's, I same with cover design. I wanted to be able to figure out how to do that myself without um needing to do the extra expenditures. Um, And also, while not using AI, because that's awful and horrible
Yeah,
and
it's
no, no, no,
soulless.
it is soulless. And I have mad respect for cover artists.
Mhm.
um, it's very fun to design covers, but it's also extremely time consuming.
Yeah, because you have to make
So
just the tiniest little changes, and I mean all the covers for your work are really great, and a lot of them have like there's like a theme or almost like similarity across them. Like they're all different, but like feel like they all belong together.
that's part of the whole like I read something about like branding,
Yeah,
even if it's not in the same series, but making things look cohesive, and having a branded look. And and I've tried to follow that sort of, but at the same time, I'm like, each book is different and it's got a different feel, and I want to make sure that it looks, like it works for that book. So all the balance. It's all the balancing stuff.
yeah, yeah. I remember. I think one of my favorite like when it was the early '90s Stephen King ones where they had like this old black cover and there would just be like solid image on it.
Hmm.
Like I feel like that was like my favorite of how those were released.
Yeah, I mean, simple does it. You don't have to be too crazy in your design as long as it just grabs people's attention. It's what stays with you.
Um, well, thank you again for coming on here. Like this has been
Oh, yeah,
awesome.
sure.
And
Yeah.
everyone out there, you should read The Undead Folk right now in preparation for The Dead Folk because it is
Yeah.
amazing and I'm a fan. So you
Thank you.
should check it out.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also be on the lookout for what's the anthology called?
The anthology is called Boreal, and it's an anthology of taiga horror, and that is coming out in the first quarter of 2025. So it might be January, it might be February. Date has not been decided yet.
Yeah, it's gonna be 22 stories. It'll be the kind you can get lost in. I sometimes appreciate the
Yes.
anthologies that are like the brick that's like, okay, this is just gonna be I'm gonna be reading this for the next week or two. It's gonna be fantastic. All right. Oh, well, thank you again.
Yeah.